Hello, and welcome to the Dungeon Masters Guild House. I am Matthew Whitby, and this is a weekly podcast that sort of allows me to sit down with some of the amazing creators of the DMs Guild and sort of chat about their design process and how they continue to be amazing. This week, I am very fortunate to be joined by Ashley May. Thank you very much for joining me.
Hi, thank you for inviting me.
No, it's always a pleasure. I'm always happy when people sort of agree to put an hour aside to put up with me and my many questions. So first question off the bat, if people aren't too familiar, what sort of products on the DMs Guild would they know you for?
So probably my most well-known project at this point is Festivals, Feasts, and Fairs. And second to that would be the Lovers Handbook. I'm very much a fluff and culture writer. I love to do things that there's a lot of crunch in D&D. There's a lot of great mechanics. There's some people out there making some amazing new systems and spells and subclasses, but I love the things that don't necessarily hinge on a dice roll, or the things that help DMs explain their world or expand on their world or make things feel more alive. So that's really where I like to focus my efforts.
So I'm curious as well. So are these, do these sort of products stem from things you use as a DM? Or is it more the case of like you just have an appreciation for these things and you would like to sort of, again, put this knowledge in the hands of other DMs?
It kind of comes from two different directions. I do just have an appreciation for that kind of thing. I enjoy writing it. But I cut my teeth on freeform role-playing games on internet relay chat, and boy, does that tell my age. But from when I was like 12, I was playing in these channels where there were no systems to anything. You only ever rolled a dice to like solve a dispute, but everything was about the storytelling. So to me, ways to help describe things, way to help move the story, ways to help flesh out a world, that's what I feel passionate about.
Okay, so I'm curious as well. So the next question leads into is like, so how long have you sort of been publishing this stuff out on the DMs Guild?
I believe I started in, I want to say June of 2017.
Okay. So it's coming up to like two nearly 3 years now. Stuff like
that. No, sorry, 2018.
Okay,
it would be June of 2018.
Yeah. No,
I was sitting here in my head going, that math's not right. Like, I know I'm not good at math, but that math's not right.
Well, I mean, like when it is, I suppose it's the and also actually that's what was the first product you pushed out on the DMs Guild?
Okay, so the first product I put out on the DMs Guild is no longer on the DMs Guild.
Okay.
So I wrote a book, a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek title called "The Best Little Whorehouse in D&D."
Okay, nice.
The whole point of the book was to be able to have, there's the running joke of party walks into a town, downtime activities. What do you guys want to do? Where's the brothel?
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to write a way that people could handle that tastefully. So that you could, for one thing, portray characters who were sex workers as more than just a cheesy joke on the side. And I wanted to create something so that people could write these instances and know how to handle it, not get creepy about it, not feel awkward about it. I wanted to create that tool so that people could handle these things tastefully. Unfortunately, at the time, when you upload a product on DMs Guild, as a holdover from DriveThruRPG, there was a little box you could click that said adult content. So I assumed that was fine. There was nothing in the rules at the time that said I couldn't. So I uploaded it, and it sold like hotcakes for about 2 days, and then it vanished.
Oh.
And I went through like the stages of grief, the denial, the bargaining, the anger, all that. And finally, I just went, all right, you know what? I'm just going to rewrite all of this in OGL and strip out everything that's Wizards of the Coast. I'm going to put this back up on DriveThruRPG. Hint, hint, you can get it on DriveThruRPG. And after that, I kind of was like, all right, I'm not going to let this knock me down. And I went on to write the Hungover Adventure Guide. Which is, all right, so your party went to the tavern, they had way too much fun, they wake up the next day and find out what trouble they got into while they were blackout drunk.
The sort of, the hangover storyline and stuff like that. Yeah. Nice. So I get it is kind of interesting sorry, let me get my words straight. Did the DMs Guild send you a notification or anything letting you know that your product was removed, or was it just like?
Yes, they did.
Okay, cool. They gave you some warning.
I logged in. Well, I noticed first when I logged in and I checked the site to see if there was any comments or any reviews, and it was just not there. So I checked my email, and then I saw the notification from them saying, "Hey, we've had to pull your product down." They were actually very nice about it. They were very nice about going, "Hey, we understand that, of course, we have the rules of once you put something on our site, you can't post it anywhere else. But we understand, we want to smooth this over. You can't have it on DMsGuild, but we will let you rewrite it and put it on DriveThruRPG."
Okay.
So all things considered, I really can't begrudge them for it. It was just kind of an oversight of rules, kind of a thing that they've now fixed. Yeah. There is no adult content button anymore.
So do you think you were the instigator? You
oh yeah, I was absolutely the one stirring that problem up.
So it's what is it? Years to come, you can say, yeah, you've definitely left your mark on the DMs Guild.
Oh yeah.
For one of many reasons, I hope.
Hey, if they have to add a new rule for you, you've left your mark.
They can't take it back. So I'm curious as well. So with the products like the Lovers Handbook and stuff like that, how do you go about with, like, how do you start a product like this and stuff like that? Just because coming from like an adventure background, I can there's a start and an end to an adventure. To these sort of, I guess, I don't know how to categorize this. You mentioned it's sort of the fluff content.
I call it fluff. Fluff is just my general blanket term for the kind of things that I love to write most. The Lovers Handbook came about, like I said, I got my start in freeform role-playing game, which is all narrative, all character interaction, all role-playing with individuals, very little DM oversight over most of those things. And of course, you have storytelling, you have people playing your characters, romances do come up. And I have seen some fantastic ones role-played over the years. I've also seen some terrible ones role-played over the years. I've had people who got weird or creepy or awkward. I've had people who decided to play a character and then horrendously mishandled that character. And it's like, all of a sudden, they turn into... A character would be introduced specifically to be a love interest for another character, and that was the extent of their character development.
Okay.
So I realized that a lot of people have issues with, like, okay, I want to have this level of drama in my game. I want to have these interactions. I want to introduce love interests, but I don't want to make things weird.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that they're a character that could stand on their own. Even if I am creating them for this purpose, I still want them to have depth beyond that. And that's where the Lovers Handbook comes into play. And I also made a pay-what-you-want player-facing version called the Lovers Guidebook Player Edition that is both here's how to get into romantic roleplay without being weird, and also here's how to handle it if somebody gets weird with you. Like how to talk with them, how to go to your DM about these kind of things, how to set boundaries. That's just kind of where it came from.
No, so it's interesting as well to hear that you're talking about a process that essentially stems outside the D&D world, and you're sort of bringing in these sort of I'm curious. Have you had the sort of experience to sort of try and use some of your own sort of fluff tools within D&D yourself?
A little bit.
Yeah.
I haven't had as much DMing experience as I'd like to have, but I'm actually currently running a campaign for some friends right now. And I'm already kind of looking at ways that I can weave stuff into the campaign that I've done some fluff writing on. So I don't want to spoil just in case any of them decide to watch this interview, but I've got a few things coming.
Yeah. Like I said, you're not going to let them know which product of yours you're bringing in. So there's at least like a spectrum it could be on.
It may not even be one published yet.
Whoa.
They might be my test crowd.
Spoilers. No. So I'm curious. So when it comes to sort of starting to write one of these products, or just any of your products, where does your ideas stem from? Where
I get ideas from everywhere. I'm actually currently working on a product that basically boils down to I haven't written this yet. Somebody had posted an adventure on a Facebook group. They're like, hey, I'm writing an adventure and it deals with these subjects, and I want to do a lot of tie-ins with other guild products. subjects.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be able to talk about role-playing romances and drug and alcohol use and some carnival games and nobles and royalty. And they listed like 2 or 3 other things, and several people came in and tagged me and commented, well, that's basically just Ashley May's library. So I went in and I was like, okay, for this point, you want this book of mine. For this point, you want this book of mine. And then I got to nobles and royalty. I'm like, I have nothing. I haven't written anything on this. Why have I not written anything on this? So at that point, it just kind of became the challenge of now I have to write a book on nobles and royalty.
You have to
and that's one of the things. List. That's one of the things currently on my docket right now.
So I'm curious as well. So when you you mentioned the idea of like with romance, you had the brothels, and then obviously the ideas of alcohol and drug abuse, not drug abuse, substance use, very different. Mm-hmm. They are, I guess the best way to phrase it is like socially charged topics. Is like but so how do you find navigating that space? Because it sounds like with at least the brothels approach, the brothel product before it was removed. You clearly did your research and stuff like that. You tried to do it in a way that was as respectful as possible. It seems wizards aren't on the same page, unfortunately.
Well, I get why. The fact of the matter is, I say it was information, not titillation. There was no really sexy art or anything like that in it. But at the same time, it's still very hard to talk about brothels and sex work without talking about an adult subject. So I completely get why it got pulled. They kind of stick to a relatively PG-13 rating on the Guild, even if that's not something that they necessarily publicize. Yeah. So I fully understand now. Like I was upset at the time, but I completely get it in retrospect. Yeah. But as far as trying to handle sensitive subjects, the first thing is just acknowledging that it is a sensitive subject. Mm-hmm. And that there are also subjects that can be mishandled very frequently. If it was a subject that I thought got handled well, I wouldn't be writing a guide for it. So most of the time, things like narcotics, in a book called Great Gilded Guilds that Isaac and I wrote together, it's basically about kind of shadowy underground guilds. And we have a chapter in there on narcotics. And even though it's a very small part of the book, I still put in a info box talking about, hey, this is a sensitive subject. Mm-hmm. And you might be cool with it, but you also need to take into account the experiences that other people at your table may have had. For you, this may be drama and an extra layer to the story. For them, this might be dragging up something that may not be a comfortable thought. This may be something that they've had to deal with at some stage in their life, and you need to be very sensitive about how you approach this. I understand people not wanting to spoil things and like just outright approach your players and go, hey, I'm including this in the story. But if it's going to be something that's going to be a sensitive subject that could potentially upset somebody, you need to go to them up front and say, hey, I could have this kind of content in the game. Are you cool with that? So either approach people up front or have safety tools in play at your table so that people feel comfortable saying, whoa, yeah. Red light, I'm not okay with this.
It sounds like it's very much these are conversations that ideally happen in like a session 0. Mm-hmm. And especially, I imagine it could be like so helpful for DMs to be like, okay, we may be dealing with some of these terms, and to hand their players like one of your products to be like, this is not this is how we will approach these topics. Yeah. I'm curious. I guess the trying to think about when it comes to writing these products in particular. Is there like a favorite part to it that you enjoy most?
Oh gosh, my favorite part is the first 90%.
Yep.
Finishing anything is hard for me. It's always a struggle. The last 10% is a combination of me going like it's the final trudge over the finish line, but there's also me constantly going back going, oh, did I write enough on this section? Did I overdo that? I really wish I could have included that. And I will write the majority of a product in a week, and then I'll spend 2 weeks on that last 90% of it, just because it's a struggle for me to bring it to a complete state. Less so now that I'm starting to get into more collaborations with other people, because I'll stick to a deadline that I'm responsible for getting to something to another person way more than any deadline I set for myself.
Yeah, I think it is the idea of like once you bring other people into the equation, it's like, okay, well, I need to. There's the any sort of like pressure is almost like 10 times.
It's like I could let myself down all the time. I'm not letting down them.
Yeah, I'm used to it. It's like, are you going to ground me? Like, what is it? I am you. No,
it's like, what am I going to do? Not work with me anymore?
Yeah, you've got no choice. So I'm curious as well. So the what was I had the question off the tip of my tongue. So with the 10% remaining, does it seem to be always the same part of the project, or is it always?
No, never. Because I've written so many projects that are so wildly different. It's not like I get to like the stat block phase and I bail, or I get to like a specific part of it and bail. It's just that home stretch of signing off on things and going, this part is finished. Because I always want to look at it and go, oh, but I could work on that a little. Oh, I could flesh that out just a little bit more. So that's where I struggle.
So I remember my question now. With some of the topics that you're tackling as well, I feel like you must do a lot of background research.
Oh yes.
And I'm curious.
Oh yes.
So how would you go about, like, again? I think, how do you walk the line between what is historical to us and what would be suitable in a Forgotten Realms setting or a?
Well, for one thing, it really helps. I've got a book right over here on my shelf. It's Ed Greenwood's Guide to the Forgotten Realms. I have the master himself saying, hey, here's how the Forgotten Realms work. Here's how nobility is. Here's, we don't call it coffee. Here's the word for it here. And Ed's also an amazing resource on Twitter. If you have any question about anything in the Forgotten Realms, he will answer it. And at this point, I kind of feel like if he doesn't already have it planned, you ask him the question and he now creates it for you.
Yeah, it's
and that now becomes the canon. He will canonize things for you. So to be able to look at the things that Ed has laid out, I can kind of get to pick and choose and go, okay, this feels like it suits the canon of the Forgotten Lore. This feels like it's on the same level. Because the Forgotten Realms is very much a mishmash. There are cultures all over the place. There are eras and timelines all over the place. So to some extent, I just try to keep things relatively general. In my book on nobles and royalty, the biggest thing for me was just kind of realizing that serfdom's not a thing in the Forgotten Realms. The lowest levels of poverty and unwashed masses that you see in a lot of things like the Dark Ages really aren't so much a thing in Forgotten Realms. People bathe. Like, it's not the filthy Middle Ages that a lot of people tend to think of, especially in gritty fantasy TV series. It's like, it's a little bit nicer than that. There's also the whole thing of like, when you start having to think about a magic economy or a world that is heavily influenced by the fact that adventurers are prolific, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, as long as I'm loose enough and general enough with things, it all flies. Okay. You can always find a way to fit it in somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's what is I like most about the Forgotten Realms setting, is the fact that I think some people do see it as potentially restricting, but there's so much wiggle room. I think, what is it? You can get away with saying, oh no, there's a demi-plane within the Forgotten Realms, and it's like, oh, I can do whatever I want here. It's a whole sort of a separate plane of existence. So to bring it back down to your sort of creative process, then, is the 10% that's sort of left behind is the fat, is that hands down your least favorite part of the project, or is there something across the thing that you just is mandatory that you kind of have to do but you don't necessarily enjoy?
I'll be honest, I usually don't do a lot of crunch. Like, backgrounds are probably about the crunchiest thing that wind up going into most of my products. So things like trying to balance out a monster stat block, like I will spend days staring at things like that whole monster manual on a business card or guides on how to balance CR. And I'm just like, no. So that's easily the part that I hate the most, because I'll get these creative ideas for a monster and then I'm like, my husband's chair is right next to me, so I'm like, honey, help.
But I imagine it's like that's something that when it's with Isaac, that's something he touched upon is it's I can imagine it is nice to have like essentially two sides of a standard DM's Guild project, like in a house at any given point and stuff like that.
It's incredibly useful. Even before he got into DMsGuild writing, he was still my sounding board for everything that I did. I would just like, he would get out of the shower in the morning and come back in the room, and I'm like, honey, let me read you the 2,000 words I wrote while you were gone.
A very sort of a captive audience, maybe.
Oh yeah.
So,
he's stuck with me.
So I'm curious as well, because it's not only do you sort of handle a fair bit of fluff writing, you also handle a fair bit of layout as well. And you have like as I imagine in some of the collaboration, you've sort of worked kind of across the spectrum of roles. How do you find? Again, I haven't had the chance to speak to a layout person on the podcast yet, so I'm curious about how you find that process. Like, what are the sort of things you look out for, or?
So I feel very nervous about being referred to as a layout person because it's one of the things that I took up doing kind of out of necessity. Most of my projects, I've done the layout. Anything that I headed up, I did the layout for, just out of not wanting to have to track down a layout person and hire them. That being said, Nate Rue is an amazing layout artist, and we're currently working with him on an upcoming project called Tarot Transcendent Treasures.
Yep.
And that was partially because I was like, all right, print on demand, I can do this. And then I start reading things about color profiles, and I'm like, I can't do this.
Yeah, again, I've not gone through the print on demand process, but everything I've heard, it sounds daunting.
Daunting is an excellent word for it. I've been on a couple of projects that have done the whole print on demand thing, and while I wasn't the one having to do the back and forth from the creators to the guild to the printers to the guild, I was the one having to deal with that. I still watched the process, and utmost respect to everybody who's handled it before. I kind of signed on to do it before I'd seen the process, and now I'm like, oh man, what have we signed up for? But as far as what do I look for in layout, I loathe the blank space. Absolutely hate it. If there's like a chunk of blank space at the end of a paragraph, I either have to put an image there or I have to write an info box to go there.
Yeah.
And to me, one of the flexible things about being the writer and the layout person and occasionally being the artist is that I have that capability. I do get to go, this page needs something. I'm going to write some fluff to go on it.
Yeah.
I'm going to create a table. I'm going to go make some art to go in that corner. So to me, it's easier than handing it off to somebody and then having to look at it afterwards going, oh boy, what do we do to fill that gap? Oh, yeah. I don't know about that.
Yeah, I'm exactly in the same position where I use I handle all the layout myself, but whereas I think I've forgotten the name of the program you can use for layout. What's the?
I know a lot of people use Affinity these days.
Oh, fair.
I actually use GM Binder.
Fair and stuff like that.
Yes. Which anybody who doesn't know GM Binder, it is a website that uses a markup language to lay out your documents, and then you can just export to PDF from there. It's not a professional tool. It does have its drawbacks, but the fact of the matter is, to be a free resource, it's phenomenally good. You can make some great stuff with it.
I know
and it's got a great community too.
There is, the free ones are GM Binder, and is Affinity the free one as well? Is that another website one? I know there's another website.
Affinity is pay software, but I think it's only like $60, which compared to every other layout software out there being like $150 or a monthly subscription, $60 is pretty reasonable.
Yeah, no, so actually for my layout, I use a Overleaf, which is a LaTeX it's for essentially, it's mostly for writing academic articles, and that's how I started using it. But then I found a template that I have over the well, I was about to say over the years, as if I've been doing this for long. I haven't even hit a year yet.
Feels like it, though,
yeah, no,
doesn't it?
I was literally baby faced before I started. This is all DMsGuild. And that's it's always interesting hearing other people's process, but I 100% agree with you that like when I fill out layout, sorting out layout and stuff, I'm doing sort of like I can move this over here. And when you are the writer and the layout and sometimes the editor as well, it's like I can just write a sentence.
Yeah.
I could just put something there, and no one will know
Yeah.
that. Like, although I think I'm working on a project at the moment where I'm not the editor, thankfully, because otherwise it would be. And I've started moving into layout, and I've done that thing where I've been adding sentences. So it is a case where like I'm gonna have to sort of send it back to get it that sort of last approval. But it is interesting. Being layout, it's a almost like stage by stage developmental process. And when you sort of bring other sort of people in, it is. I think I don't know if it's the same for you, but when you start your first collab, it is kind of weird how those roles, you go from being involved in every role to be like, oh, I've written my stuff, I've handed it off, and
it's very strange.
Yeah.
I'm working on a project. I worked on a project actually with Onyx Path that I am still under NDA with them, so I can't give a huge amount of details, but the book that's going to be coming out is called Legend Lore, and I wrote some sections for that, and it was phenomenally weird for me to write something and then hand it off. And I'm still, of course, waiting for the book to come out. It has not come out yet, so I'm just kind of sitting there like, okay, are you sure you don't need anything else from me? Like, we're done? Like, I sent back the red lines. We're finished. Like, that's it? So that's been a very interesting situation for me. But I have started getting into more collaborations where it's like, okay, I have to laser focus in on this part is mine. Leave the rest alone.
And it's like I said, it's equal part weird, and it's freeing. It's that idea that like you know, you've had your seal of approval, but then there's always that weird thing of I don't know if you've had the effect of where you're in quite a few collabs, and it's been I don't know 2 months since you submitted. So you're like, oh yeah, I worked on that. That's the thing that I did.
Yeah. Fates of the Forgotten Realms 2 just came out. And I was actually brought into that. Isaac and I both were invited into that midstream. And we had been working on it for a very long time. I did not realize that other people on the project had been working on it for 18 months. So it's like, oh, wow, the months that we were on it were dinky in comparison.
But it is weird as well. I guess it's the classic sort of like a solo project versus a collaboration is the almost like each person adds, each person on the project inadvertently adds a month. Not intentionally and stuff like that, but I mean, there's like
feels about right, yeah.
It's like again, I haven't worked it out. It's just off the top of my head. But it's hard to argue I think. Let me get my words out. The end product for a collaboration always feels of a higher quality to me sometimes than if it was something I'd sort of worked or labored away by myself.
Because you're able to pick and choose people for different sections. You're able to go, hey, you're a stat block guy. You handle all these monsters, and you're the subclass person. You build these subclasses, and we're gonna go hire a professional artist, and we're gonna go hire a layout person. We're gonna hire an editor. So when each person is able to laser focus on their thing, everything becomes better for it, because nobody's having to reach outside of what they're comfortable with. Everybody's just doing what they do best. And if as long as the person managing the project is a good manager, it just comes together so beautifully.
No. And like that, I think I'm just going to have to give this podcast a slogan of collaboration is amazing, just because it's a sentiment that every collaborator sort of echoed.
Collaboration is amazing, but at the same time, I've been doing a lot of collaborations lately, and I'm like dying to do something solo again. And I kind of come from the Oliver Clegg school of just get it out there. It doesn't have to be perfect. And that's the thing I'm trying to drill into myself so that last 10% doesn't just kill me.
Yeah.
But the idea of it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be as professional as that collaboration with 12 people on it and professional artists. It's like, it's not going to be on that level. But if I love writing it and I believe in the content and I'm passionate about the message I'm getting out there, just get it out there. Let it go.
Yeah, I think as well, it's interesting here. So the first was I spoke to JVC Parry, and he was talking about the process of going back to his earlier projects. And it's like I say, I mean, I think it's universal for everyone to look at their catalog of products and to see their journey essentially. And I think as well, it's like, yeah, with the more products, even just by the nature of doing more, you get better at it. Whether it's it's a huge success or a flop, it's get things out there.
Ideally, you learn from everything that you write. Every project that you put out should teach you something about the process. And if you didn't learn anything new from the process, go back and take a closer look, because there's probably something to be learned there.
I'm now trying to I make sure I regress a little bit each project. So next project, no art. Next project is going to have like 3 words on the page. Speaking of, I was about to say speaking of regression, but the opposite of that. Speaking of improvements, what's something you kind of wished you knew earlier on as you sort of started the DMsGuild to where you are now?
Something that I wish I knew sooner.
Yeah.
I wish I knew about the importance of self-promotion and community. And when I say that, I do need to say I learned a lot about self-promoting and community from when I first joined, but so much more I've learned over time, and making connections with other people is vitally important. Not just like posting your stuff to the guild Facebook or tagging the right things on Twitter, but actually on a personal level, getting to know other creators is vitally important. Because not only can they be great resources to reach out and go, hey, I know that this is really kind of your thing. Can you give me your opinion on this? Or, hey, I want to hire you for this job or invite you to this collab. But also just to be inspired by other people. Surround yourself with other creative people and it will make you more creative. I wish I had done more of that earlier on. But when you first enter a community like the DMsGuild, it's very easy to kind of go, oh, those are the pros, those are the big guys. I don't belong in that crowd. It's like, you totally belong in that crowd.
Yeah.
I actually just told somebody the other day, I was like, as long as you are putting out quality work, the only difference between you and a professional is whether or not you're charging for it. So charge for it. Therefore, you are now a professional.
I must admit, I think as well, I think the first product you put out, it also feels like such a huge hurdle, and especially especially if like, again, for me, I joined the sort of community after releasing my first product, so it was more the case of like, okay, well, I've done this thing, I should probably try and engage with the community and stuff like that. And then it's sort of the case of like, oh, I've mispriced it. I told the story the other day when my first DMsGuild product almost got took down because I forgot the DMsGuild logo on the front cover. I was one of those people. But thankfully, I was speaking to Drop the Die, JP Little, and thankfully he'd done the same thing. So it's a common thing to just sort of.
If it makes you feel any better, I almost did that the other day. I was working on a cover. I'm like, yeah, that looks good. Save. Oh, wait.
You just need like a Photoshop thing where like if you're creating a file called cover, it just stamps a logo on it somewhere.
Yeah, I actually have a Google document that's shared that's called the DMsGuild Self-Promotion Guide. And it's basically all of the lessons that I learned from everybody else in the community. I decided to put into one Google Drive document and just throw it out there for everybody to see. And one of the things that I have thought of adding to that document is a project checklist to go, have you done this? Have you been promoting it on Twitter? Did you put the logo on the cover? Just kind of go down this checklist anytime you're about to put a product out, and it will help.
I must admit, looking through your the sort of guide for advertisement and stuff like that, it's a really useful tool. And stuff like that. And
Thank you so much.
I think, like I said, it's out there, and I think it's echoed in the sort of community of like, this is really useful. Like, why, like, I'm so glad someone that went through the effort of putting this all together.
Now, if I could just practice what I preach and follow half my own advice, I'd be set.
You know, that's we can work on that in the future. Stuff like that. They say they think that it gets easier with time, so we'll just have to give it a little bit more time. So I guess as well. So I guess I get people who haven't put their product out on the DMs Guild and are maybe cautious about the process of getting the name out there, advertising. What's like a snippet of advice you might give them? Is it just the promote early, or is it?
I definitely believe in promote early. Make posts on Twitter. But again, one of the issues with Twitter or things like that is if you're not already making connections, people, it's kind of like tweeting into the void. You're like, I'm just going to throw this ad out here. And if nobody knows who you are, or you're not hitting it just the right moment, it's kind of just going to get missed in the fog. So I feel like joining the community, talking to people, come to our Discord, come to the Dungeon Masters Guild Facebook page or Facebook group and talk to people. Tell people about what you're working on. And some people may go, hey, I'm really excited about this. Or, hey, if you're working on that, you might be interested in looking at this. Just get that kind of involvement with the community, because the fact of the matter is we're all a bunch of nerds trying to turn our passion into a job, or if not trying to turn your passion to a job, at least trying to get your passions out there and share them with the world. So it's, for the most part, a really supportive community. And you'll find a lot of people who want to see you succeed and want to help you succeed. So get into that community early.
And I think as well, what I think it was great about the community is the sort of there's a really cool saying that I can't remember, so I'm just going to butcher. I'm going to say something completely different. Bringing everyone up.
Add it in post.
Yeah. No. I think, what was it? The high tides rise all?
Yes. Yeah, a lifting tide rise. A rising tide lifts all ships.
There you go. That's exactly the thing. And so I think I always look up to or look towards Adam, who did his animal sidekicks, where from the get-go he was like, "What? Let's bring new people in." And I think so much of it getting over that sort of first hurdle of a product, and at least having I was about to say a shelter, which would be fitting for the animals. Just sort of the guidance through. And the same with, what is it, the RPG Writers Workshop. There are so many tools out there to help people have an easier time. I wouldn't wish, my first products experience on anyone.
It gets better. Yeah. I just want to tell everybody who's never done it, I promise you it gets better. It at least gets easier. You at least know what to expect. Even if you're going to have that anxiety before you hit the publish button, at least you know when it's coming. So it gets better.
Honestly, I think the moment I don't have pre-release jitters the day before, I think I've probably lost my soul somewhere. I think it's just, it's like knowing it's the calm before the storm, or the storm before the storm in some cases. Well, okay, cool. I guess keeping it on the theme of not keeping it, bringing it back to the theme of your projects. Do you have a dream project that you've kind of like it's off in the distance that you can sort of always slowly move towards?
Oh, I've got a few dream projects. I would love to do a sequel to the Lovers Handbook at some point. I would love to put out more information. I'd like to create some prepackaged NPCs and put those out. I've currently got a project that on occasion I go in and scribble things in. That was actually inspired by Critical Role. There is a romance novel that they find in the second series called Tusk Love. It has to do with there's a handsome half orc on the cover and everything. And the idea of there being books in a world, books that you can pick up and read or collect or track down, really kind of inspired me. So I've got a collection of what I call copper novels, or it's copper dreadfuls and silver novels.
Nice.
And it's based on the whole idea of the penny dreadful and the dime novels of being these little cheap stories that just get published as fast as possible for people to pick up and read. And they're usually over the top dramatic and ridiculous. But I want to have the idea of somebody could throw one in a treasure pile and somebody's like, what the heck is this? And have just a little paragraph of, here's a summary of this cheesy copper dreadful story that's in it, and have people go, wait, that was book 4? What happened in the first 3? What are the other ones?
I must admit, like, so from a adventure writing standpoint, the amount of times I've written a library and then just like, all right, it's filled to the brim with books, and then it's like, here are 3 books of notes in this entire library, to be able to be like, point to something like this going, oh yeah, dude, there's some novels, read away. That's an awesome project idea.
It's one of those things that it's like, I wouldn't say I ever like put my nose to the grindstone on. Like that document will sit and just languish for a month at a time, and then I'll sit down one day and I'm like, all right, let's write 3 more books out of this. And then of course each book is only like a couple hundred words as a summary of here's what happened in this installment. But it's like, it kind of just lets me get my horrible cheesiness out. Because they need to be a certain special kind of bad, like so bad they're good.
Oh yeah.
So that's like my one outlet for that kind of storytelling.
I mean, it is the idea that these are books someone would put in a treasure chest just because like it's precious to them, but they don't want people to know that they're necessarily reading it.
It's important to me, darling.
Yeah, I really relate to the characters. So first and foremost is the potentially revisiting your Lovers Handbook, and then also second. So I'm curious, is the sort of urge to, is it like write a sequel, or is it the idea of to take what is like, I've worked my question out, there you go, that's the important part. So is it the idea that this second product would be a sequel, or is it the idea that this would be a separate product that is, along the same themes?
I picture it being, it could be a standalone. You could just pick it up and use it by itself. But in my mind, it's very much an add-on to the first. Not dependent on it, but it expands on the same themes. Because one of the things that I realized after I published Lovers Handbook was in my notes of basically a rough draft bullet list of here's all the things that are going to be in it. There were a couple of things that I didn't squeeze into it before it went to print. And it will not print, but before it went to the website. So there are a couple of things in there like guides on how to write a love letter or things like that I wish that I had gotten around to. So it's like, all right, you know what? This just means I have to do a sequel. Plus, I love creating NPCs. That was one of the things that I really enjoyed in Great Gilded Guilds, was being able to create these guilds and create some key figures within them. And I'm like, you know what? Let's create some just drop-in characters, some potential love interests that you can just pick up and put directly into your story and go, here, this is a fleshed out character. Here's motives. Here's some reasons why they might want to travel with your party, and here's some ways that they can add to the party without being a combatant. So that's just kind of some of the stuff I've got in mind for the sequel.
I kind of like hearing about it more from the idea of like where you've I guess where you try to improve from the previous products and stuff like that, or you see the gaps that previous products feels that you wouldn't have necessarily known until you sort of put it out there. And I'm curious, how have you sort of reacted to the sort of the feedback of some of these projects?
Most of my feedback's actually been pretty positive. There have been a couple of areas where people are like, hey, I wish I had a little bit more information about this, or I wish this was a little bit better explained. But for the most part, I feel like I'm kind of cutting so many new roads that people aren't like, oh, well, you missed this. It's like, there's nothing specific that was missed unless it's like, oh, I just wish there was a little more about this.
But then I guess if it is, again, that's the wonderful thing about DM content and stuff like that, is you put enough out there for them to run with. And if there are gaps that they need to fill, then I'm sure, they should be able to improvise.
Well, that's the thing that I tried to do. I tried to very much give people the tools to do it. Instead of just going, hey, pick this thing up and drop it in your world, I go, hey, here's the thing you can pick up and drop in your world. But if you really want to customize it, or you really want to make it fit your world, here's some ways to do it. So I try to anchor all my documents in the direction of, I'm going to show you how to do a thing, but I'm also going to give you the tools to do it.
So I'm curious about how you find the process of between the products like the Lovers Handbook, or like your like rule of cool compared to the like was it I think 100 reasons I had to go, or the was it 25 hangover things, the ones where it's like you have a finite number to work with compared to essentially a more free form document.
So I had to go because originally I think I said over 180 reasons. I think it's actually 193 because I need you to understand how short the development cycle on this book was. I wrote the majority of this book in 2 or 3 days. Like
Flurry.
I just sat down and just cranked through it because I was like, hey, I want to do this and I want to make it based on characters' backgrounds instead of classes, because one person's fighter is so completely different from another person's fighter. I want to categorize it by backgrounds. And by having backgrounds, I knew that I had a finite number of backgrounds. Like, these are the ones I want to cover. I don't want to get into like the background that gets included in Curse of Strahd or the background that gets included in Tomb of Annihilation. We're gonna stick with the basic backgrounds. And I thought I was done. And then I realized there were things like the soldier background has a mercenary variant. And I'm like, a soldier and a mercenary are going to have very different reasons why they needed to go. So at basically the 11th hour, I'm adding new tables to this book that I had not intended to add to this book. So basically that just kind of spun out as oh wait, I forgot this background. Oh wait, I forgot this. Oh wait, this one's got a variation. So that one just kind of took care of itself. As far as Hungover Adventure Guide, I think I put like 100 or 101 in there. And I think to some extent that was just me going, I'm going to set a random number and see if I can do it. Yeah. Spoiler alert, I could do it.
Yeah. So I think everyone sort of had those. I guess like I don't know whatever it is, but that weird flurry of creative inspiration that goes into a project, and it's always weird where you can't necessarily predict which project's going to come out on.
Oh yeah,
like it's.
So Nobles and Royalty, the one I'm working on right now, like I said, I basically started work on that because I realized that was the one gap that I had in this random list that I had not covered. So Isaac and I went down to a convention in Tampa called LumiCon, and we were running their D&D room there. And we're standing in the lobby on Wednesday, waiting to get checked into our hotel room. But because we're staff members, we have to wait on the con organizers to get there. And they were like an hour away. So we're like just sitting next to a pile of our luggage. And I'm sitting there with a phone going, I really want to write a document about Nobles and Royalty, but I just don't know where to start. And Isaac's like, well, you could write about this, you could write about that, you could write about that, you could write about that. And I'm just sitting there taking notes. Like, yes, keep going. And so he gave me about like 15 or 20 little single sentence ideas of, hey, you could write about this thing. And throughout the convention weekend, I was emceeing events. We were both running stuff in the D&D room. We were both hosting panels. And literally between events, I'm pulling out my tablet or I'm pulling out my phone and writing on the book. Because for whatever reason, busiest weekend of the entire month is the time that I suddenly got inspired to write.
I think it was in your mind, just like, I mean, I couldn't get much more busy, could I? So I might as well just...
Oh, yeah. Why not?
And I imagine the process of writing Nobility and Royalty kind of got a little bit more relaxed after that weekend.
Yes and no, because as soon as I got home, I was like, all right, I want to study things like how you would address nobles of different ranks. So next thing I know, I've got like 4 Wikipedia tabs open on that.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I really want to talk about letters patents. The whole idea of this is the document that basically states your nobility. And next thing I know, I'm sitting there reading these like old English manuscripts of letters patent and trying to go, all right, how do I make this readable?
Yeah.
And still sound fancy.
Is there a pattern here that I can sort of see?
Yeah, I that literally was it. I'm sitting there trying to dissect patterns and go, okay, depending on what rank you are, you change out this. If it's above this rank, you use this wording. If it's below this rank, you use this wording. and here's where you change the names of the nobles, and here's where you put the date, and literally creating a build your own letters patent from these ridiculous, obnoxiously wordy old medieval letters. And it's like, wow, I thought this was going to be a relaxing project.
I think what's kind of fascinating, speaking like about your process behind writing things, is I think on the DMs Guild there is a gravitation towards like, oh yeah, you can do monsters, you can do adventures, you can do like subclasses, but I think people don't necessarily realize the potential fluff stuff like that. And I think if these are things that can really enrich a particular environment or setting, or improve a particular role-playing experience.
Well, the crazy thing is, I kind of feel like I'm getting away with something. Like everybody else is out there writing all this crunch and everything, and then I'm out there and like, oh, you're really doing something unique. And it's like, because I'm not as comfortable with the crunch. Like, I'm comfortable writing fluff. This is what I love to do. So on the one hand, I kind of feel like I'm getting away with something. Like, eventually people are going to realize that I'm not working as hard as them. But at the same time,
I think it's like I said, if anything, the opposite.
What comes easy for one person does not come easy for another person. Yeah. So I've kind of had to like hammer into my own head. It's like, this does not come as easy to other people. The same way I can't write a stat block. Mm-hmm. This is hard for some people. So it's kind of the trade. It's like there are other people out there that are creating these monsters and creating these magic items. And I'm like, oh yes, I need this. I'm writing the same kind of stuff that they're like, yeah, I need that at my table because I can't come up with that on my own.
It's again, it's one of the amazing things about the DMs Guild and the range of tools out there and the things you can I mean, people need this stuff like across the spectrum. Unless there's people out there creating it, and they're not going to sort of get what they need. I guess okay. So I guess to keep it on the sort of community, is there anyone out there on the DMs Guild who particularly inspires you?
Oh boy, this is a heck of a question because there are so many people out there that inspire me. Like I mentioned about the whole like get into the community, because you will just surround yourself by creative people and they will constantly inspire you. The one that I absolutely have to say is I can't not mention Isaac, my husband, because I literally fell in love with him through his writing. So it would be a little difficult for me to not say his writing inspires me.
Do you want to know what the most wholesome thing is? Is he said the same about you in his?
Oh my
thing.
gosh!
I look at that. I felt like I had to say that rather than just let you guys watch each other. It's too wholesome for me not to say anything.
Oh. So, but if I had to pick somebody other than him, I want to consciously, actively make the choice to not pick anybody that I have ever worked with or been close friends with, because next thing I know, I'm going to start getting into a list and I'm going to forget somebody and I'm going to feel terrible.
No nepotism here.
No. So if I'm just picking just out of the blue people that I have not worked closely with and I'm not already super tight friends with, I got to go with Oliver Clegg. I am constantly blown away by the creativity of his ideas and his ability to just throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. And a lot of it does, but he just comes up with some of the craziest ideas and follows through with them as every bit as intensely as somebody writing a very serious project. His Until the Cows Come Home was actually the first out-of-a-box adventure I'd ever run before. Everything else I'd ever done was my own writing or was something that Isaac had written. I'm just looking over his notes. Mm-hmm. So that was my first experience taking a boxed adventure and running with it. And it was a wonderfully fun experience. And I like I said, I'm also very impressed with his ability to just go, you know what, just get it out there. Just get it out there and get it out there and get to the next project. Keep moving.
He is literally he's a whirlwind, I think, like of creativity and stuff like that. It's I think he's a living embodiment of chaotic good.
Absolutely.
It's the best
and
way.
Like one of the funniest people on Twitter too. So
and endless entertainment. No, I think it's more to the point now. I think I've decided I have to get him on. I think was it a few people before I've spoken about him, because like I said, there are certainly there's a few people here who who clearly stand out in the community as like beacons of whether it's chaotic good or just general wholesomeness. Or I know it's amazing to see them work and continue to work. And their products always like one after the other. Like, oh yeah, no, of course that makes sense. That's very on brand. Nice. Okay, cool. I guess the leading into the next question then, you touched on it a little bit, but are there any projects that you can reveal that you're currently working on, or what's pending?
So the stuff that I'm currently working on right now that I can talk about is...
Sorry, my camera's so blurry. I'm just trying to...
Oh, you're fine. I was just like, whoa, what's going on? What's going on? The things that I can talk about right now, I'm currently up to my eyeballs in doing layout for Cursed Classes, which is a phenomenal project that I have very little to do with the writing of. So I get to brag on the writing by going, oh my God, you need to see all these classes and subclasses that these guys have made, including you, actually.
Yeah, I'm on that project. Yay.
Oh yeah. This book is going to be stunning. Isaac always likes to say that he tries to find a problem and fix it. And I feel like the problem being fixed here is things like vampirism should be way more fascinating than it is in the stock book. Getting bit and becoming a vampire basically is like, okay, roll up a new character now. It's like, but what if you want to play a vampire? This book answers that. What if your character dies and you want them to come back as a revenant? What if your character decides, I want to become a lich? Yeah. There's so many fascinating things that get fully fleshed out and explored in this book, and I'm so hyped to see it come out.
There's a real sort of good band of like creators with it, and I think it's, for me as well, it's always interesting to, I get you sort of touched on it earlier. It's the idea of like it's easy to look up to like people in the community and be like, oh dude, I shouldn't be working on the same person as these people. They've done so much. But then it's just, you know, from the process of collaboration, you're just like, oh yeah, no, we're all still, you know, we're all like just nerds. I think
we're all the same pile of nerds.
Yeah.
I'm currently working on Nobles and Royalty as a personal product. No idea when that's going to come out because everything else that has a deadline comes first.
Of course.
I'm working with Isaac on Tarot of Transcended Treasure, which is going to be a collection of magic items ranging from common all the way up to artifacts based on all of the cards of the tarot. And it's got some very interesting systems in it for how exactly you would involve the tarot in your existing D&D games. I'm really honored to be working on the Amaroon's Almanac series. I call it the best product that I ever accidentally applied for a job with. So Steve Fiddler is running that project, and I saw on Facebook, like, hey, people you might know. And it's like, I'll send Steve a friend request. And about 30 minutes later, I got a message from him going, I really hoped that you were applying for the job posting. I'm like, there's a job posting? And Amaroon's Almanac is basically taking different types of biomes from all around Faerun. Forests and Underdark are currently out, and the next one we're working on is Grasslands. But the whole idea of Amaroon's Almanac is to take Amaroon, who is the great-great-granddaughter of the wizard Elminster, and after her involvement in the books Elminster Must Die and its sequels, basically she and her lover Arkleth have decided to travel the world and see more of it. And basically it is focusing on an area like forests and going, here's the kind of monsters you're going to find in forest. Here's the flora and fauna. Here's new kinds of magic based on forest. Here's new druid circle to deal with forests. Here's some phenomenal maps of forests. And interspaced with that are Amaroon's journal entries of having visited specific forests, like the Adi Wood, like High Forest. And it's all put into this great book that kind of breaks down the Forgotten Realms on a granular level. Because Forgotten Realms can be very intimidating to look at as a whole, because it's such a huge world. So to be able to take this book and just kind of focus in on a little area and go, hey, let's talk about just this part of the map, and let's show you all this amazing detail and give you some plot hooks and give you some of the things that you'll find there. It's been a wonderfully fun project to work on, and I've been very honored to basically be the voice of Amaroon, especially now that Ed Greenwood has agreed to write our foreword and has been looking over the books. I'm like, oh God, the guy who created Amaroon is now reading me writing Amaroon. What do I do? But apparently it's got his seal of approval.
Yeah, honestly, I don't think there is not a higher seal of approval than the actual.
That's a pretty big feather in my cap, if I do say so myself.
Yeah, I'm curious as well. So in the process of obviously writing the preface and stuff, has he given much feedback on the documents himself?
Ed's actually amazing. Pretty much any time we're like, hey, Ed, after the spell plague, what happened to this region? Mm-hmm. Send him a message on Twitter, and he writes back with like 8 paragraphs of, well, here's what happened with it. We were chatting with him about a specific forest, and he was like, yeah, and there's living magic storms through there. And we're like, we knew there was living magic in Eberron. There's living magic in the Forgotten Realms. And we're like all writing notes all of a sudden, like, oh my gosh, we didn't know this. So we've actually been in a lot of contact with Ed. He's wonderful about answering questions. So it's been a phenomenal experience.
And I don't suppose, so you've got, there's obviously Forest and Underdark. I take it, has there been announced how many more there's going to be? Or...
off the top of my head, I believe there's 8.
Okay, fair.
It's going to be an 8-book series. There's going to be Arctic. There's going to be, I believe, deserts. You know what? I can actually take a peek right now and tell you guys some.
Unfortunately, we can't on this end, but we're just going to have to.
Yeah, but I can read them off to you.
Yeah.
So we're working on grasslands right now. I know in the future, I'm not going to list them all just in case, but I know we've got mountains are definitely on the docket. Deserts are on the docket.
You're sort of like standard biomes and stuff like that. What you'd expect.
We want to get very generalized with it. Underdark is about the only thing that was more broad, because the Underdark literally stretches from one side of the world to the other. And the thing that I realized in writing Underdark is there's not as much detail out there about it as you would hope. When you start getting outside of the cities, like I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of this, but Menzoberranzan, once you start getting outside of cities like Menzoberranzan, there's not a lot written about it. You start getting this idea that it's nothing but repetitive dark tunnels everywhere. And one of the things we really endeavored to do is go, no, let's look at the ways these could be interesting locales. What could change about them? What could vary from location to location? And I think that the whole team put in some great work and really turned the Underdark from dark caves where scary things happen into just fully fleshed out worlds. They're basically taking little tidbits and constantly going back and forth to Mr. Greenwood going, hey, how does this sound? And him going, yeah, that sounds great.
No, honestly, it sounds like again, you've had the opportunities to work on some amazing collabs, and I think it's going to be very interesting to keep an eye on these sort of products as and when they come out. For people who maybe want to keep in track of, like, they're just like, what, these things exist? I want to hear more and everything. How can people sort of like, hear news about your work?
Follow me on Twitter at Ashley May Writes. We're hoping within the next month or two, Isaac and I are going to set up a Patreon. And if you check out the DMsGuild self-promotion guide, we've already got links to the Patreon and our coffee on that page. There's not a lot there in return for it, but in the next couple of months, we're hoping to really launch those and start providing a lot more content directly to people on more of an OGL route instead of just DMsGuild.
Well, yeah, thank you. Honestly, I think thank you so much for taking the time and having this chat. This has been honestly, I speaking to both you and Isaac has been so interesting because I guess it's like the type of content you both create are so different, and also it's the type of content I haven't spoken to people about. It's been sort of like adventures or items before. So I'm having a right giggle. This has been amazing.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. This has been an absolute blast, and I love being able to talk to other creators about this is what we do. Yeah, no, like I said, again, as I said, they're welcome back anytime. I would probably not next week. We might want to space them out a little bit, but maybe we'll say Q3.
give or take.
Yeah.
But no,
let's get some new things to talk about.
Yeah, there you go.
That's
a good way to take it. I've been Matthew Whitby. Thank you very much for listening to the Dungeon Masters Guild House. I still don't have a good way to end these, so I will just say goodbye. Bye.
Like him and subscribe to him. Bye.
Yeah, I'll leave that in, and bye.